Tonight's discussion is titled Writing Women into History. When we learn about the Mughal Empire, our school textbooks, which are possibly every person's first source and introduction to Mughal history, usually feed us a very specific based on primarily military reforms and succession wars that the Mughals brought with them. So, our guest tonight here is an historical detective, I would call her one, who's going to completely shatter that narrative. In her brilliant new book, that's Shehenshahs, Begums and Shehzadis, introduce Miss Tanushree Podar. Ma'am, it's an absolute delight to have you.
Thank you for having me on this show. And I'm glad that you mentioned that most people know the Mughal history through the classroom textbooks. And what they learn is a minuscule part of the history. And with all the distortion that is happening in the recent times, much of the real, authentic parts are getting lost. And since people don't read as much and they're not so aware, they accept the distorted versions very easily. So when I was asked to write this book, I didn't accept the commission immediately because I argued with the publisher that there's a plethora of books written on Mughal history. And what new could I bring to the table that would make the reader interested in my book? And then they said, no, I'm sure we are very sure that you can do it and all that. So they just tried to boost up my, morale and all that. But I kept thinking, and then it took me quite a while to zero in on to the perspective that I wanted to present. And I definitely wanted to present the emperors, begums, and the princess and prince as human beings, not just a crowned head or a person in power, but who was the person behind that? Who was the person really? And that is what I tried to piece together. Little nuggets of information, and those little pieces of information. I had to sift through so many books to find one odd sentence. And I'm glad that, a lot of people are realizing that this is a different book and it is. And if you see, our interest in the Mughals is not waning. They have gone so many centuries back, but we continue to be interested because they had become a part of our cultural integration. The Persian and the Indian culture had been brought together so beautifully that even today we wear those kind of clothes. The embroidery still exists. The cuisine people really love even now. So the things that they left behind, and of course, architectural structures and monuments and music. The language Urdu was born during that time, and even the poetry of that time, it still exists. And I think it will continue to excite people. So what we need is a fresh perspective. And begums, yes, like you said, we have a very distorted notion of what the Mughal begums were like. They lived very luxuriously and they did live in very, cordoned off places. But just like today, those women also had their ambitions, dreams, and, lives beyond the harem walls. They also wanted to leave a little bit of history behind and imprint their name somewhere. And I'm sure since they saw the emperors, their husbands and sons doing all this, the architecture and all that, somewhere a dream was born in them that maybe I should also do something similar. And that's how you find that so many monuments which were actually built by these begums. Don't forget that they had limited resources compared to the emperors. So they could not build palaces, they could not build Taj Mahal, but they did build Humayun's tomb, which still lasts. And Bega Begum, I don't know how many people know, she's the force behind the entire project. She personally took, charge of the entire structure. So then we know Jahanara because she created Chandni Chowk, which was the pulse of Shah Jahan Bagh. And these women were visionaries actually. So imagine Jahanara, creating so many shops, about 1,560 shops in that area. But she did not forget that these travelers needed a place to stay. They needed amusement. They needed all sorts of things. So she built a sarai, which was really magnificent. And she built gardens for the people to relax in. So all these things that they left behind are still with us. So we know that these were not powerless women, just sitting and lazing away their time.
No, absolutely, that's true. Less like an ancient dynasty, as you have the Mauryas, or you go way back in Indian history. But it's one could almost say that this is like an epic season of a succession, toxic family dynamics, massive egos, cutthroat sibling battles. I think this is one question I was really hoping to ask you. You did mention in one of our chats that you have a corporate background. While writing this book and researching for it, I mean, did your corporate mind, just kick in and you feel that, especially the way the women, I mean, handled crisis, they built alliances, and strategically, they mapped out everything. So do you think, a modern day woman in a corporate role could almost take inspiration from the women, from the Mughal women?
Absolutely. I think it was a masterclass in management. Don't forget that there was so much rivalry itself and, attention seeking within the harem, and to manage all that and run, the Begum Sahiba, the Badshah Begum was in charge of a harem, entire harem, which was run almost like the empire, a mini version of the empire. It has its, it had the administrative jobs, it had, the spies lurking, it had control of the things, situations as they were developing. So there was politics, there was rivalry, there was also a lot of industriousness. They were industrious people. Like Noorjahan designed so many garments and jewelry and perfumes. So all that was entrepreneurship. If you see, and of course the finances, some of them were running, businesses, trade, sitting inside the harem. They had ships which were trading across the seas. So imagine the kind of mind that they would be having. Any corporate person can learn a lot of lessons from those women actually, and they didn't go to any management school. They did it on their own steam, their own vision and power.
I think that's so rightly said, because one of the most interesting parts I felt was you've written a chapter which is on the shadow sovereign. And I feel it's so well titled as well, because you pointed out that they were generating massive capital. I think a question that now comes next to my mind is that when you talk of modern India, and even media portrayal for that matter, when it comes to historical women, they're mostly portrayed as beautiful muse. Whether it's artwork, whether it's cultural influence. The question that I'd want to ask you, that do you feel that how history is written and how for most of the population, how these women are perceived, it stops at beauty? But what's your take on it?
Well, they were not just beauty; they were beauty with brains. And as far as beauty is concerned, we really do not have any real portraits. They were veiled. So whoever drew them or painted them, painted out of imagination more than the actual visual. So in a way, we don't exactly know what they looked like. Whatever depiction we have is a very rough, sketchy kind of imagination. And if you read my book, Noorjahan's Daughter, in that I have given a very interesting process, as I assumed something like that could happen. In that I wrote about this painter creating a portrait of Begum. And what they did is they brought out a servant girl with kind of the same nose, another one kind of lips Begum had, yet another one with the eyes, and someone with those hands and the complexion. So they had a whole configuration of women coming together to provide the artist a kind of visual encouragement to do the portrait. Something of that kind, that's of course a little bit of my imagination, but something of that kind must have happened, because let's face it, they were all veiled and they rarely came out of place. Even when Noorjahan was, dictating terms to the ambassadors or giving out her suggestions, she was behind the screen. And that is the beauty part. There is no denying the brains that were at work. Imagine, hunting with the same skill. Tigers, the guns, very skillfully she shot 3 tigers successively. And Jahangir wrote about it. He eulogized her skills. And she was as competent as him. Then she was running the empire, scheming shrewdly about how to bring her own person to the throne after Jahangir. Calculation and the shrewdness really requires a lot of planning and brain, because she did it in successive steps. She didn't do it outright. It took her a while. That, it was very obvious right in the beginning.
Another chapter that in your book is on Gulbadan Begum, which is the Veiled Chronicler. and narrative, because she otherwise would have been too threatening as a chronicler. I mean, or otherwise, the immediate names that come to anybody's mind when you talk about historians are mostly dominated by male chroniclers. So how do you, is that something that you were trying to help the readers come to an understanding? That's my question to you.
Akbar took the decisions to ask her to sort of provide material, because he actually wanted to piece together the history of his father and grandfather, and he wanted to bring together people who had lived in those times and had experienced, so that it was as close to the real thing as possible. Gulbatan Begum was one of them, who had been Baba's daughter and been with Humayun through his reign, and then she was with Akbar. She was an obvious choice. And imagine the Emperor's vision. He knew whatever was happening in the harem, the family matters special. Who could know those except for a person living in the harem? And what she left behind actually gives us a very authentic voice speaking from within the harem, mentioning things which other historians have not written about. She talks about the family unpleasant moments and decisions taken by the Begum's consultation with others. Then she talks about Humayun's hardships and how Hamida Begum endured those, because she was there with them, going through the desert and not having water, everyone deserting them. They even had to, kill a horse and boil its meat in the helmet. Imagine the dire circumstances. And at one point, she was heavily pregnant, and there was no one, they didn't have a horse for her to ride. And he lent her, his horse. Things like this could have narrated better than a woman, because she sort of combines the passion, the emotions, and the happenings together. And it is because of her that we know how the Begums lived. The weddings, she has described the weddings in detail, the kind of dowry that was given. All those are there in her book. She was a very honest woman, in fact, because she talks about the Begums being displeased because the emperor is not, coming as frequently to them as he should, and complaining that he's spending time with the aunts, visiting the aunts, and then he responds to their, complaint. These are very, very intimate family matters which she brings out and speaks about them with great honesty. I think it was really one of the landmark moments Mughal time. She's the only voice who has given out so much information of that era.
Absolutely, and spoke about the fact that who better than to chronicle family dynamics. It's almost an insider piece. Coming to the next part, you've written quite extensively about the sibling proxies and the sibling rivalries have been covered across various chapters in your book. So you've got the dead sibling rivalries, you've got the takta takta, which is, and this is so interesting because for most people, whether it's the wars or brewing rivalries, and a lot of movie representation in it, especially to do with Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh, it's almost between men. The reader realized that one really thinks at the end that were men just chess pieces being masterminded by these two brilliant sisters in the backdrop. Is that something which is even relevant today?
I feel that when it comes to property and power, women can be as deadly as men, and more so. And this is very, very evident in case of these two sisters, where they took sides. One went with Dara and the other one because she was close to Aurangzeb, so Roshanara chose to go with Aurangzeb. And how they poisoned the mind and manipulated things to result in the climax where they both went to battle. And I think it was all about power and ambition. Ambition is a great thing to have, but when you start stepping on toes, others' toes to achieve your ambition, that becomes a little difficult for people to accept. And so in this case, and if you see historically, most Begums have influenced politics in some very subtle manner. It has not been very, outright,